On to Friday's matchup, Brett, for the Cotton Bowl. The 8 seed Ohio State Buckeyes, 5.5-point favorites at Caesar Sportsbook as we record this. Minus 105 is the VIG on that point spread, but pretty much sixes everywhere else across the board. So a little bit of a discount if you're looking to take Ohio State at Caesars if that line is still up. Taking on the number 5 seed in the CFP, the Texas Longhorns, total of 53.5, depending on the shop. I mentioned the adjustment, so I'll touch on that first. The look-ahead line for this game was Ohio State minus 1.5, minus 2, maybe 2.5. But as of early last week, I saw some Buckeyes minus 1.5 out there on the look-ahead spread. Not that you can get a lot down on that number, but it's still worth noting in terms of the market adjustment. So before we get into the handicap, if we go back to 2019 LSU, because I think it's comparable in that sense, when Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers made that run, not only in the college football playoff, but in the latter course of the season, there was a pretty major adjustment on their power rating as it related to the betting market. Is this warranted, similar adjustment on Will Howard and the Buckeyes?
It has been made. We saw this.
Should it have been made?
Should it have been? Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's difficult because this is the first year of the college football playoff in terms of having 4 separate rounds. It is different, and it is worth adjusting your teams in terms of recent form rather than taking these season-long numbers. And I do have an adjustment that I'll talk about in this handicap, but I do think you have to look at what Ohio State's been doing in the past couple of rounds. And if you want to factor the Michigan total outcome into this, sure. I don't believe that this is the same game being played that was played in rivalry week. So yeah, I absolutely think it was warranted. The books made an educated move. We saw Circa, one of the sharpest books out there, make a bigger move than this because some opened at 4. Some of the rec books opened at 4.5. They opened up at 6. It's like, I'm following that. They know what they're doing. They're confident enough to hang a 6 out there. And because point is, if you lay an Ohio State minus 1.5, you're going to have a major, major liability on the Buckeyes that are playing, I'm not afraid to say, the best football in the country right now.
Right. And you look at this offense that the Buckeyes have displayed over the last couple of weeks, especially against Oregon, just an onslaught in the first half. Will Howard hasn't recorded a turnover-worthy play in the first 2 playoff games, but Jeremiah Smith against one of the best cornerbacks in college football in Barron for Texas, an All-American quarterback. Smith had his way with that Ducks defense and had his way with Tennessee's defense for that matter. Same result, similar result here. I know you mentioned staying away from Smith's props in the first round. We didn't do a podcast together last week. How would you approach, maybe not Smith in particular, unless you want to take a look at his receiving yards props, but just Ohio State's offense, team total-wise, full game total-wise? How do you look at Ohio State's offense against Texas's defense?
Well, while I talk about Jahdae Barron versus Jeremiah Smith, can you actually please pull up the props on that? In Ohio, I no longer have access to those props. I am curious what it's at. But the one thing I do want to bring up with Barron, he's 5'11". Jeremiah Smith is 6'4" with the receiving range of a 2-car garage. Jahdae Barron, he's arguably the best pure DB in college football right now, but there's only so much you can do when you're faced with somebody that's that size, and I think that's why these teams have had such issues guarding Jeremiah Smith, even outside of his skill set, is he's just bigger than every corner in college. There's no corners right now that have the length that, you're not seeing a Sauce Gardner prototype corner in college football right now, certainly not left in the college football playoff, among the college football playoff teams, and that's just, if you don't have the size and the length to guard him, you're just not going to do anything about it. And you can go ahead and double team him. You can have a safety bracket him. That's fine. But then you're leaving fewer resources to Emeka Egbuka, who's an All-American type player. Even G. Scott. I mean, the Buckeyes just go so deep. Brandon Innes, you're talking about a receiving core that just doesn't end. The well doesn't dry up of 5-star talent. So sure, you can try. We see that it's becoming viral screenshot or photograph Jeremiah Smith. It's a little angled, so it's a little misleading against 3 Oregon defenders just going over top of him and catching the ball. And it's kind of a point where it's like, you know what? He's going to get what he's going to get. You got to mitigate the other facets of the game. Did you get a chance to pull up the yardage?
Yeah, it's at 85.5.
Oh, that's it?
Significant vig both ways, but...
Yeah, well, understandably so. I'd take over 85.5. I mean, we've seen the winning game plan for Ohio State, and there's no reason they're going to change it this round. It's throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith as many times as you can, and it seems to be working for them.
I want to go back to the quarterfinals with Texas and Arizona State, just because Arizona State backdoor covering in the fourth quarter into overtime. Right. Epic game. Texas winning in double overtime, interception ending that one. What did you make of the result, whether it was Texas and their inability to close out a lower tier opponent, or maybe Arizona State playing a more efficient game than what their power rating said, and therefore they were underrated entering the game? Or is that just a byproduct of Texas's full body of work? What did you come away with immediately after the game, and then as you've maybe thought about it heading into this one, especially considering the market adjustment from the look-ahead line?
Yeah, it could have been my error watching the game. I kind of came away with it like, wow, Arizona State, I did say, hey, I didn't get to say it on here, but I do think Arizona State was going to play a closer game than many believe. And it was just kind of pure will from the Sun Devils. That was an incredible effort on their part. But after sitting on it and going back over it and writing up a lengthy preview on this game over at the lines and doing my homework for this, Texas scored 14 points in 3 snaps with possession of the football, and that includes the punt return touchdown by Silas Bolden. They didn't score a touchdown again until the fourth quarter, and that's something Texas has done multiple times this year. And the takeaway for me is, what happens when opposing teams don't get the offense going early and score early against the Buckeyes? We saw it happen in the first 2 rounds of this playoff. You get flash fried. The game's over by halftime. So, you do have to note that Texas's defense is going to put up a lot more of a resistance against Ohio State's offense than either Tennessee, who I think their defense is a bit overrated, and Oregon, whose defense was just kind of meh. But those long stretches of quarters without touchdowns can't happen. And Arizona State's defense is really good. It's a greater sum than a lot of its parts will tell. And they got, they obviously got a very important player back mid-game. But if you're Texas, you just can't afford to go 2 quarters without scoring a touchdown, because Ohio State's not going to do that. I don't care what defense you are. We've seen in a disregard for the level of competition they've been playing. There's not a college defense in the nation that's going to slow down that defense to the point of, or offense, that you're not going to score for that long of a time. So Texas has to be able to score. And if Ewers is playing the way that he was against Arizona State, which we talked about not being able to trust him all year, and we talked about him not being very good. He underthrows deep balls, but I think it was exemplified against Arizona State because his receivers were so wide open and he wasn't able to get it done. They're not going to be that wide open against Ohio State. Let's be clear about that. That's not going to be an opportunity that he's going to be able to waste. He's going to have to make NFL throws against these guys, and who knows, maybe he will. Maybe there's a little bit of added oomph there because he was a Buckeye for a year and played very sparingly. But if you're going to have that kind of dry spell from your offense, it's game over. That's his, we're going to see another flash fry from Ohio State if that's the case. And that's my biggest takeaway from the Arizona State game is now it was self-inflicted. It wasn't even Arizona State's defense was playing pretty well, but it was majorly self-inflicted. There were opportunities for Ewers and Texas to fully put that game away by halftime, and they didn't do it.
And on the flip side, there were opportunities for Arizona State to win that game in regulation, not just on the penalty that wasn't called. I don't know how that wasn't called.
I don't know. Don't ask me. I have no idea.
But also failing to score. Granted, they got the safety on the subsequent play, but failing to score a touchdown, 4 tries from the 2-yard line, or at the very least in goal-to-go situations. So I made the case that maybe Texas playing with their fruit a bit in the fourth quarter, but you could also say that there was a lot of meat left on the bone for that Arizona State offense. Now, you mentioned Quinn Ewers against the Buckeyes defense. He has had a lot of success this season historically against cover 1 defenses. I've been the first person on this podcast to criticize, or maybe the second, depending on who spoke first, to criticize Quinn Ewers. But schematically, it is a pretty good matchup for him. On paper, personnel aside, no?
Sure. But I'm not setting personnel aside. I can't in good faith do that. I do want to talk about, though, in the specific passing game, the different facet of it. A lot of people are talking about Texas' defensive line against Ohio State's offensive line, especially with the reshuffling and the injuries. I really think the biggest impact in this game is the Ohio State defensive line against the Texas offensive line. The Buckeyes in 2 college football playoff games, 32 pressures and 12 sacks, including 8 on Dylan Gabriel, quarterback that doesn't get sacked because of scheme and how good his offensive line in front of him is. Quinn Ewers was only pressured 14 times, which is something to be said for a very good offensive line. But in those 14 pressures, he was sacked 5 times. That's a very high pressure to sack ratio, and that's concerning because that's Ewers taking sacks. And there was a couple of times where defenders were running free and being able to get to him against Arizona State, but it's just a matter of you got to see that protection and slide the protection up front. You're able to fool him, apparently. And then, in the SEC championship game, he took 6 sacks on 17 pressures. I think Ohio State's going to be able to get home, and I think that's where the game's going to be pivoted is their ability to rush the passer. I mean, Jack Sawyer was the ridicule for 2 full weeks on social media about his reaction to Michigan playing in the flag, and now he's taking that anger and putting it on the field, and that's a very scary prospect for somebody that's a potentially a higher NFL prospect. And then you have JT Tuimoloau on the other side, and Tyleik Williams even up the middle is extremely disruptive. So I really think that's going to be the issue for Texas's offense. It's not going to be, can the receivers get open? Can Ewers play well against cover one? Can they run the ball, which I can talk about too. There might be issues there. I really think that Texas is going to have some sporadic issues keeping Ewers protected, and against the way that Ohio State's defense has been playing, that's going to be a major issue because they've been flash frying these teams without turnovers. They're not forcing turnovers in these playoff games. It's 3 and out. It's a sack on 3rd and long, and you're done. And you're punting the ball back to them, and they're scoring in 3 plays.
Right. I mean, you go back to me, just someone who handicaps college basketball a lot, and UConn's dominant run over the last 2 tournaments, but specifically the one from a couple years ago where they got hot down the stretch and they dominated every single team they played in March. The case was, okay, the projection over the course of a full season was X for this game, but the market adjusted. Same deal with Ohio State. And like I said, more comparable from a college football level of things when you take a look back in 2019 with Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers.